Hey folks, welcome back. RagingLevine here with yet another Ikoria deck tech. This time, we're going to do a little commander building around Gyruda, Doom of Depths. Gyruda costs 4 and 2 blue-black hybrid mana, is a legendary Demon Kraken. It's a 6/6. It could be your companion if your starting deck were to contain only cards with even converted mana costs. But when Gyruda enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. Then you put a creature card with an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. Now, as a companion, Gyruda is a little hard to make happen and probably not worth it. Well, it's hard to say actually, but I'd lean toward not. But what I'm more interested in is how Gyruda performs as a commander. I was a little down on this card in my set review, but now I've done some work, more specifically some math, and I think I've cracked the code. Of course, I like to think of Gyruda and a lot of Ikoria's creatures in their forms as Godzilla monsters. And this one is Gigan or Gigan, Cyberclaw Terror. I don't know how to pronounce Gigan's name. I'm not a Godzilla scientist like Charlie Day in that one movie. But I am a knower of cool art. And gosh, look at this thing. This is very cool. It's got like a hook hand and like a claw hand. I don't know. It's just rad. It's super cool to look at. So anytime we look at Gyruda, we're actually just going to look at Gigan here or Gigan. I don't know. I may not know a lot about Godzilla or pronouncing things, but I do know a little bit about math. So I took my deck list and I plugged it into the hypergeometric calculator. See, I wanted to know just how good the deck is if we depend only on our own creatures for Gigan's trigger here. So I've built a deck with 23 creatures with even converted mana costs. That is, for the record, all the creatures in the deck. So with 23 creatures that fulfill this condition within the 99 cards, we have about a 66% chance of getting a hit off of this trigger. Not great. When you're casting your 6 mana commander and you whiff a third of the time and just get a 6/6 for 6 mana, that doesn't feel good. Then I realized we should be taking the opponents into account. So let's assume, with this 66% chance from our own stuff, that we're playing against 3 opponents. Those 3 opponents each have, let's average things out, let's say 10 even converted mana cost creatures each in their deck. Running the numbers on that, we get a 91% chance to get a hit with Gyruda. That's pretty good. If we only whiff about 1 in 10 times, 1 in 11 times, I think that's an acceptable fail rate. And moreover, the story equity that you get out of good hits will put Gigan over the top and make it an even more awesome commander. So, without any further math, let's take a look at the deck list. We're starting off with some heavy-hitting 6-drops. Steel Hellkite, Grave Titan, and Kakusho, the Evening Star. Steel Hellkite, great at getting rid of problem permanents. Grave Titan makes an army of zombies. And Kakusho, of course, fantastic at draining the table and then, theoretically, coming back later to do it all again. Wormcoil Engine, Sire of Stagnation, and Massacre Worm continue the trend of high-end 6-drops. Wormcoil Engine, a great creature that turns into 2 not as great, but still high-quality creatures when it dies. Sire of Stagnation, a fantastic card draw engine, while also being a perfect 5 out of 7. And Massacre Worm, great at clearing boards of tokens and making opponents lose quite a bit of life. Also a 6/5. Can't really be mad at that. Rounding out our heavy-hitting 6-drops, we have the Souls, Soul of New Phyrexia and Soul of Innistrad. I did not find room for Soul of Ravnica in this deck list because, as a 2-color deck, it's not really worth it. But I do like the effect Soul of New Phyrexia and Soul of Innistrad have here, giving our other creatures indestructible and returning creature cards from the graveyard to our hand, as well as having effects from the graveyard. Hard to complain about that in a deck with some self-mill. Let's move on to some utility creatures. We have Solemn Simulacrum, which you see in most every commander deck, here to get us a land and draw us a card. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, a great enters the battlefield ability here, combined with a Death Touch body that makes it a decent blocker. And Archaeomancer, which will be used to recur some of the instants and sorceries that we'll see later down the deck list. Rounding out the 4-drop slot here, we have Thassa, Deep Dwelling, and Glen Elendra, Archmage. Thassa does a great job doing an impression of Conjurer's Closet in this deck list. Spoiler alert, there's also a Conjurer's Closet coming up a little later. Because I think blinking Gyruda is one of the best things we can do in order to take advantage of that trigger without spending too much more mana. Glen Elendra, Archmage, just a great creature, counters non-creature spells, persists, and then later might come back for more because, shockingly, not only is there a blink sub-theme in this deck, there's also a reanimation sub-theme. More 4-drops here. We've got Spark Double and Phyrexian Metamorph. Spark Double can come back and duplicate Gyruda without causing any kind of legendary problems, and Phyrexian Metamorph, just a very flexible clone. We've also got some creatures that are poised to act as point removal here. Ravenous Chupacabra, Duplicant, Noxious Gearhulk, and Hostage Taker. Hostage Taker even letting us steal something in the longer term. Noxious Gearhulk gaining life. Duplicant doing a nice exile, and Ravenous Chupacabra just being nice and flexible. We're also going to need some card draw. When your commander is a 6-mana sometimes do nothing, and especially once it hits the table, it doesn't really have a huge impact other than its size, we're going to need some card draw to make sure that we draw some action here. So, Watcher for Tomorrow, Dusk Legion Zealot, Baleful Strix, and Disciple of Bolas, all great at giving us some extra cards. Disciple of Bolas in particular, fantastic for sacrificing some of our bigger creatures that might have done their job after entering the battlefield. I know, you were expecting to see some of the Reanimate and Blink cards next up, but I like to generate a little suspense in these deck overviews, so let's talk about some mana rocks. You want to make sure you have plenty of those so you can cast Gyruda on time, and then cast Gyruda again when inevitably it hopefully dies and goes back to the command zone for reuse. So we've got Dimir Signet, Talisman of Dominance, and Felwar Stone, alongside Thought Vessel, Mind Stone, Soul Ring, and Wayfarer's Bauble, which, while not a mana rock in the same sense, does help us ramp. Alright, that's enough suspense. Let's talk reanimation. We've got quite a few cards that are going to allow us to take even further advantage of the Gyruda trigger, because since we're going to be milling ourselves and everyone at the table so much, we're going to want to be able to reanimate more stuff than just what Gyruda hits. We may even want to reanimate someone else's odd CMC creature. I know that sounds somewhat heretical here in our even CMC creature theme deck, but that's the way the news goes today. So let's talk about Animate Dead and Necromancy, both enchantments that come into play and bring creatures back from the graveyard. Necromancy even playable at instant speed if you're willing to lose it very quickly. Reanimate and Beacon of Unrest, both sorceries that pull creatures out of graveyards. Reanimate a little bit costly in the life department, whereas Beacon of Unrest actually does a great job by shuffling back into your library for potential redrawing. I know. Reanimating one creature at a time is not good enough. So let's talk about some of the more value-oriented, higher-cost reanimation cards. We've got Victimize that gets 2 for 2. You sacrifice a creature, you use the Victimize, you get 2 other creatures back from the graveyard. Hopefully they're better than the creature you sacrificed. We've got Blood for Bones, which is great with Gyruda. You sacrifice Gyruda, let it go to the graveyard, and then bring it back to the battlefield. Or, if you've got something better in your graveyard that you want now, you can just pop it back to your hand and recast that nonsense for 6 more mana. Speaking of 6 more mana, why not try Ever After and grab 2 target creature cards back from your graveyard to the battlefield? Finally, Whip of Erebos will send things on sort of a final journey to the exile zone, but that's okay once you've gotten the requisite amount of value out of them. Sometimes whipping a creature back can make the difference between life and death. Remember when I said there was going to be a Blink sub-theme? Well, I wasn't kidding. Here's Essence Flux and Teferi's Time Twist. Now, these are not all the Blink cards, but they are some of the lower-cost, more direct single-target Blink spells that we have in this deck list. Both great at blinking Gyruda and great at blinking some of the other high-end enters the battlefield creatures we have, something like Noxious Gearhulk, Massacre Worm maybe. There are a lot of great options for these cards outside of just our commander. That's why we've got cards that blink 2 creatures at once. Enter Displace, Ghostly Flicker, and the cantrippy Illusionist Stratagem. Now, I know we all saw the Archaeomancer earlier, and of course that's going to be part of this strategy, but sometimes you just blink Gyruda and one of those other huge creatures and get a bunch of value. That's great too. Sometimes Gyruda brings back the Archaeomancer, and you just have a crazy turn. Of course, what Blink deck would be complete without Magic the Gathering's favorite TARDIS, Conjurer's Closet? This time-traveling phone booth, or whatever, I guess I don't know enough about what's that show called? The Doctor with the time and the stuff? Anyway, this card's pretty good. I gotta get out of this bit before the Doctor Who fans come murder me. Alright, well, at least if somebody casts a murder on me, I'm going to have a counterspell for it. We've got 4 counterspells served up for you today. Familiar's Ruse, which lets you bring a creature back to your hand. I know this looks like bad counterspell, but when you're bringing back something like Baleful Strix, it feels pretty good. Negate, Unwind, and of course, Fierce Guardianship from Commander 2020. All great options for countering spells that might threaten your board presence, or, even worse, get rid of your graveyard. We're going to need some card draw as well from our spells, and why not make that card draw something that fills the graveyard? Thirst for Knowledge, Forbidden Alchemy, Frantic Search, and Fact or Fiction all do a good job of refilling hands or filtering cards while still adding fuel to the graveyard for our reanimation strategy. Of course, if you like drawing cards and you're playing black, look no further than Phyrexian Arena, a great way to get an extra draw every single turn. Let's talk point removal for a minute. I know it looks like both of these spells cost 4 mana, but really only Eat to Extinction does. And since Eat to Extinction exiles a creature or planeswalker and does a fake Surveil 1, I'm going to give it a pass. Even though it's a little more expensive than I might like, it's still a very good card. Deadly Rollick, meanwhile, as long as Gyruda's on the table, is going to cost absolutely nothing to exile a creature, and that's just huge. Even though our commander costs 6 mana, I still think Deadly Rollick is worth a try. Of course, 1-for-1ing sometimes doesn't do the job, and that's where these cards come in. Finale of Eternity, of course, sometimes a huge reanimation spell, but mostly just kills 2 or 3 creatures. Toxic Deluge and Damnation, meanwhile, are great Wrath options. Now we're getting into sort of the general powerhouse cards of the deck. Altar of Dementia, a really great option to finish the job on somebody that we've milled quite a few times with Gyruda, or potentially just mill ourselves for more reanimation targets, though with the number of reanimation cards we have, that is only sometimes the right play. Panharmonicon, which doubles up not only the Gyruda trigger, but many other enters the battlefield triggers in this deck, and Strionic Resonator, Panharmonicon's best friend, here to double our triggers some more. Let's get into the mana base. Now, I know you know about these dual lands, but don't skip ahead. Don't stop watching the video. There are some doozies in this mana base that you're going to want to see. A couple of cards that really make the engine hum for Gyruda just a little bit more that I think you're going to want to know about. So, Watery Grave, Dimir Aqueduct, Dimir Guildgate, Temple of Deceit, Drowned Catacomb, Sunken Hollow, Choked Estuary, Fetid Pools, which notably has cycling, and Morphic Pool, a sort of different pool, I suppose. Alongside Polluted Delta and Command Tower, round out the dual land / multicolor producing land group here. Let's move into the utility lands where some of the real spice lives. We're starting with Lonely Sandbar and Barren Moor. This is a 38 land mana base here, so between these two and Fetid Pools, I'm looking for these cyclers to carry some weight in the late game. We've also got some of the obligatory utility lands here in this color combination. Bajuka Bog, exiling somebody else's graveyard. Reliquary Tower, keeping our cards in hand and preventing any forced discards to hand size. And of course, Nephalia Drownyard, because sometimes we want to mill ourselves, and sometimes we may actually want to mill an opponent. Ghost Quarter and Strip Mine here to deal with problematic opposing non-basics usually. Don't strip mine people's basics, folks. It's not a good look in casual games. And here are those heavy hitters I was talking about. What Gyruda deck would be complete without Volrath, Stronghold, and Mortuary Mire? After all, we're going to have all these creatures going to our graveyard. Why not leverage them even further? This way, when you cast Gyruda, you can be even more sure that you're going to hit something, and it's going to be sweet. Both of these cards do a great job of making those triggers even stronger, so make sure you include these in your deck. I know Volrath Stronghold can be a little expensive, but I promise you it's worth it. It's a commander card you're going to want to cherish and treasure for years to come. And we've hit the basic land portion of the mana base. That means we are finishing up this deck list with 8 islands and 10 swamps. That is the whole thing. Alright folks, if you like that deck list and want to see the whole thing, make sure to head to bit.ly/RagingLevine Gyruda. That is a case-sensitive URL, so make sure you engage the shift key. Once you're done with that, please make sure you hit all the good buttons on this video. That way I can get all those good endorphins, and you can get notifications about future videos, and everybody wins. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with another Ikoria Commander Deck Tech.